The Josiah Manifesto releases today. It's Jonathan Cahn's latest book, and I believe his best. And I'm so pleased to be able to interview the author himself, Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, to talk about this important book. Now, I'll give a disclaimer. I'm the publisher, so I'm not exactly objective. It's such an honor to be able to publish you, Jonathan, several books since The Harbinger, which was the first book and really the biggest book. And each time you have a new book, I say it's better than the one before because I read all of them, almost immediately when the manuscripts are finished. So let me start by asking, what is this Josiah Manifesto going to reveal, and why did you pick that title?
Well, I would say, what if God was sending us a message, actually a revelation for this hour? What if it was a blueprint about what was going to happen in the days ahead, how to stand? What do we need to know to prevail for the days ahead, for what's coming? And what if there was a mystery that was behind everything we've just been experiencing, where the changing of America, the shaking of America, from COVID to what's happening in the country right now? What if there was an ancient calendar that actually ordained these events and ordained the actual dates, the days they would take place, in some cases, even the minutes and the second they would take place? And the Josiah Manifesto is going to open this up, and it's really going to take the reader on a prophetic mystery tour, because it's taking like all sorts of mysteries are coming together. They're going to converge on really even mysteries from the other books. I mean, things that began that I spoke about in the Harbinger, in the Paradigm, in the Oracle, in the Return of the Gods are actually all coming in for a landing, kind of converging to open up a key, which is the blueprint. What do we need to know for the days ahead? And so the Josiah Manifesto, because Josiah is going to be part of that key to what we need to know for the days ahead.
Well, I'm always fascinated on how you even see these things. I know that God reveals them to you, but in this book, you talk. Well, your other books, you would talk. Well, this day and that day. This time it was down to the second, yeah. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but with Amy Coney Barrett, when she was announced, I guess her nomination was announced to the Supreme Court, it was down to the very second when something else was happening in the Washington Mall. I happened to be in the Washington Mall. I remember that day very well because it was in the news. And we are jumping ahead, but hey, we're just having a conversation about it because people are going to have to really get the book and read it to get the full impact. There's no way in an interview. And I know you're doing lots and lots of interviews. I'm appreciative of you fitting my podcast in there. But tell us about the seconds. That really fascinated me personally.
This is one key in the mystery, but it's whenever all things come together, and that is that during during COVID, when it all came and everything was locked down, I and others had been led to have a national day of prayer and repentance, and centered on the National Mall, and so in Washington. So we did. Now it was about all repentance and return, and I had no idea until it got to the weeks down to the event that actually on the ancient calendar of Israel, that there's a day called Shabbat Shuvah, which means the day of the return, and it happened to be that exact day. So we chose the day of the return was on the day of the return. It's appointed for the turning of a nation. Now it turned out that President Trump had to nominate the next Supreme Court justice. Now this is the most crucial because Amy Barrett was going to be the vote that basically is going to overturn Roe versus Wade. It was all set in motion on that, and when he would do that. Well, he chose as the same day, the day of return, the Shabbat Shuvah, the day of turning of a nation. Well, it wasn't that he chose it. I'm sure God chose it. And as we were on the mall praying and praying for God to overturn abortion and repenting and all that, and the president was setting in motion the overturning of abortion. But it went even more because I was led at 5:00 on that day to seal it all with the sounding of the trumpets, shofars, the sound of God, the sound of Jericho. And I said, when you hear this sound, everyone shout. And so I prayed that, Lord, I said, we're sealing everything that we've done here, every prayer. And I believe the prayer of 50 years, the prayers of God's people. And then I said, let the power of God go forth. And I said, go. The trumpet sounded. And at that exact moment, the president opens his mouth. And that was the very second that began the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And the thing was, when the trumpet sounded, it was 5 o'clock, 4 minutes and 33 seconds. When the president opened his mouth, 5 minutes, 5 o'clock, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, down to the exact same moment. So the overturning of Roe versus Wade was the hand of God, and it was done to the sound of God, the sound of Jericho. It was God, our God is exact. So that's how precise the Lord is.
And I was there on the mall. I remember that shofar blast.
Yes.
Of course, those of us on the mall vaguely knew that Trump was going to announce his nominee, didn't know exactly when. It was on television. One thing about television, when they record it, everything's timed down to the split second. So
Yes.
you can verify that, yes, this is true. Of course, the return was also being live streamed. There was irrefutable proof that this happened. Now, since you mentioned Amy Coney Barrett, there's something else very interesting about her lifespan, and the year 50 that I found absolutely fascinating. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about that? Because what I'm hoping to do is to whet people's interest to read more about this. And we'll hopefully, before the time is up, we'll wrap all this up. But I think that that's important to talk about now.
Yeah, one of the mysteries in all this is the mystery of the Jubilee. And the Jubilee is, of course, the 50th year, which is a year of restoration if you lost something, but it's also a year of restitution. It's when everything is undone, when everything is reversed for good or bad. And the thing is that it was in 1970 that America began killing unborn children on demand. That's when abortion began, and in America, on American soil. And so if you go 50 years later, what happens? What happens is a plague comes to America. Another form of death comes to the land. And the thing is that actually Jeremiah says that one of the ways God answers the killing of children is through a plague. So it happened 50 years, and there's much more to that, but that's the overall framework. But then there's also a principle that, if you remember, the Egypt, the very first killing of children was the Egyptians. They threw the Hebrew males into the Nile. But there was one child born among that slaughter in the Nile. I mean, he was passed through the Nile in a basket. That was Moses. He ended up surviving, of course, and he grew up to overturn the power that tried to wipe the children out. Well, so the question is, could there be another child of the Nile, in a sense, in America? And well, America began that 3-year period, a crucial 3-year period of abortion when it entered the land until Roe versus Wade. That was the very first generation. Well, a child was born in the midst of that slaughter, and that child would grow up to become the Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett. And she would, and actually when she was born, it was right as Roe versus Wade had entered the Supreme Court. It's right in between the two hearings of Roe versus Wade that she was born. And so she comes to this child born during that time, comes to the Supreme Court, and she would be the one, her vote, because she was the last one by Trump nominated, she would be the last one, she would be the vote, her vote to that one vote, overturn Roe versus Wade. When did she cast it? She cast it when she was in her Jubilean year, when she had, in her 50th year, she cast the vote. And when Roe versus Wade was overturned, it was actually overturned in the Jubilean year of Roe versus Wade. And at that time, Amy Coney Barrett was 50 years old as well. So it all comes together. That's just a little bit, but there's so much to this.
Now, the Josiah Manifesto reveals some stunning discoveries behind the coming of the pandemic.
Yes.
Just elaborate on that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, I'll give a little taste. And that is, I said how, this Jubilean mystery that 50 years, so the 50th year of abortion was 2020, the year of the plague. But it goes even more than that, because the thing is that the actual day that abortion first makes its entrance on demand on the continent of America is in New York, when it enters the legislature as a bill, literally as a bill that's actually going to become the precursor of Roe versus Wade, and it enters the assembly on the day of January 20th, 1970. What happens if you go 50 years later? It brings you to January 20th, 2020. Anything happen? That was the day, the official day that the plague entered the land. That was the day of patient zero. So the day that abortion entered, the day that the plague entered, a death for death, exactly 50 years to the exact date. But then there's more, because everybody remembers in the middle of March is when this pandemic fell on everybody. There was one day that the media calls the day that changed everything. It was the day the lockdowns kind of fell. It was the day that the president addressed the nation, the day that America was quarantined, the stock market crash, everything. The day, and it was March 11th, 2020. What happens if you go back 50 years? It takes you to March 11th, 1970. Anything happen? March 11th, 1970 is the exact day that abortion began being practiced on American soil. 50 years to the exact day the plague falls on the nation. And I'll give you one more just for this one. That is that where did this abortion really spread to America? It was through New York. And so what happened when the pandemic came, when COVID came? It all focused on New York. 1 out of every 2 cases of America was in New York at that time. And then on April 10th, New York passes a milestone. There are more cases of COVID in New York than any other nation on planet Earth. April 10th, milestone. What happens if you go back 50 years? It brings it on April 10th, 1970. It was the day that New York legalized abortion. 50 years to the exact date.
Wow. One thing I remember reading in the book was that abortion is older people killing the unborn. COVID ended up being a disease that mostly killed old people. Very, very few children were killed by that. It was almost like, I don't know what you call it, but it was almost like it evened out. And there's just so many insights like that in the book.
Yeah, it's amazing. It was very precise, and at the same time, when you look at the number of babies that were killed in that 3-year period, 1979 to Roe versus Wade, 1973, it turns out to be 1.3 million. When you look at the number of Americans who were killed by COVID in the 3-year Jubilean period, 2020 to 2023, it was 1.3 million, the exact same number.
Wow. Let me ask you this question. Why does the ancient valley of, you're going to have to help me out with my Hebrew, Hinnom, or Hinnom, have to do with New York?
Well, that will, Jeremiah is basically prophesies in Jeremiah 19 that the death will come back to the place where you shed the children's blood. Well, New York is also the capital of abortion in America. More children have been killed there than any other place. So the plague came right back like with precision to New York. And it also in 1970 until Roe versus Wade, it spread to America, abortion through New York. So more children were actually killed in New York in that first 3-year period than it was the majority were killed in New York. Well, when the plague came, when COVID came, they just discovered, when scientists looked at the genes of the actual the virus, what they found out is that if most cases of COVID, if you had COVID, most of them came through America's Eastern Gate, New York, same place where America spread, where New York spread the death, same place. The Gate of America was the place of both the comings of both deaths.
The book opens up with a mystery that happened on January 6th. Tell me about it.
Well, there is a whole gigantic mystery behind January 6th, and that is that, and I won't go into all the things, but where I said that the mysteries of the other books are kind of coming home, landing in the Josiah Manifesto, and that's one of them. In the paradigm, it speaks of the mystery of Donald Trump, and behind Donald Trump is this prototype of Jehu. Jehu was wild. Trump is wild. Jehu was unpredictable. Jehu had started a crazy race to the throne of Israel. So did Donald Trump. Jehu made an alliance with the religious conservatives of the land. So did Donald Trump. Jehu came face to face with the nation's former first lady in his rise to power. So did Donald Trump with Hillary Clinton. With Jehu, it was Jezebel. And then Jehu is linked to the Temple of Baal. Jehu pulls down the Temple of Baal. Now, the Temple of Baal was the center of the killing of children. So it's interesting that Donald Trump, according to this prototype in the paradigm, and this came true long after the paradigm came out, it's saying that he would be instrumental in pulling down something to do with the killing of children. And Donald Trump would be instrumental in pulling down Roe versus Wade, which is pretty much the temple of Baal in America. But the thing is that even what happened on January 6th is, I won't go into the detail except to say this. At one point in the biblical prototype of Jehu, he calls for an assembly. He calls for people to gather in the nation's capital. They gather around this great national Capitol building. And then in the Bible, then they go into the building while proceedings are going on. They storm the building. And I will just say there's a lot of there's a mystery behind it. There's so much significance behind it. But on that first week, when the Capitol Police announced how many people they arrested on site for who had come stormed the building, they put headlines. It was 80 people all around, all the headlines. And well, if you look in the Bible, it says the number of people that stormed that building was 80 men.
Wow. You know, there's a mysterious object that appeared in New York and Washington, D.C. that you deal with in the book. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I witnessed one of them, and that was that, you know, when Trump started rising, it was just before the election, the first election where he's going to become president, in New York, his hometown, and Hillary Clinton's town, an object appears, and it's linked to Baal. It's the Arch of Baal, and the leaders of New York have a big ceremony around the arch. They play music. They have a sign up that says Temple of Baal. You know, so all about this thing, which is linked to the killing of children. So you have Jehu. You have this kind of war going on, this spiritual war between Jehu and the Temple of Baal. And there's so much to this. But the thing is that then later on, when Trump begins actually working against the America's Temple of Baal, which is Roe versus Wade, and he appoints the Supreme Court justice, he appoints Kavanaugh. Well, Kavanaugh was in his hearings. Remember, everybody went crazy over these hearings. I mean, it was fury because of the issue of abortion. It was fury. While they're having that showdown on Capitol Hill, an object appears in front of Capitol Hill. It's the Arch of Baal, right in front of the Capitol building on the National Mall. So again, it is like all foreshadowing that ultimately the modern day Jehu is actually going to be instrumental in pulling down this temple, which he would, even after his presidency. That's when Roe versus Wade would be overturned by what he did.
One of the things I enjoy in all your books is you talk about all these ancient Hebrew things that those of us who aren't of the Jewish tradition often miss, even though our preachers preach stories from the Old Testament. We don't understand it, and you bring it up. And here's one. I hope I say this right, Rabbi. It's the mystery of Adar. Is that how you say it? 13 and 7:23, and the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What does that mean, and how do you explain it in the book?
Well, there was a decree in the book of Esther that was going to bring death and destruction, and that was the decree of Haman. And the thing is that it was linked to the date Adar 13. Adar 13 is the 13th day of the 12th month. So in the Hebrew calendar, the 13th day of the 12th month is linked to a decree to bring death and destruction. Roe versus Wade was heard before the Supreme Court on December 13th, 1971. That means it was heard on the 13th day of the 12th month, the day of the evil decree. Then if you go further in the book of Esther, another decree is issued, and it undoes Haman's decree. It's a decree of nullifying the decree of death and destruction. It was issued forth. It went forth on the Hebrew day of Sivan 23. Well, there was another court case called Dobbs versus Jackson, which would actually end up overturning Roe versus Wade. The day it went forth to the Supreme Court was June 15th of 2020. But on the Bible's calendar, it was Sivan 23, the day of the decree that nullifies the evil decree.
You know, I've told people that your books connect the dots. If you remember when you're children, they give you this thing with a bunch of dots. And if you connect the numbers, it forms a picture. And when you connect the dots, these things begin to come alive and we can understand them. And I mean, you know, part of it just makes you go, wow, or part of it for me says, you know, this really shows that God is in control. This could not be coincidental. Yeah. So just kind of walk us through, in the first part of the book, you talk about, you touch on the things that we've been talking about, plus a lot more. But then you come to Josiah.
Yes.
And I remember from Sunday school, Josiah was always a favorite lesson. We learned a lot about Josiah. He was the boy king who grew up, and he was the one who turned Israel back from worshiping pagan idols back to the true God. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but had he not turned the Jewish people back to Judaism, it would have ceased to exist. It would have become another pagan nation like everyone else. The Messiah would have never come. I think that Josiah was actually that pivotal. Am I right? And what was it that he did that is actually a blueprint for today?
Yeah, well, the thing is, all these mysteries and much more we've just given a little taste of, are all converging to what I believe is a message from God to us and a blueprint from God to us. And that is through, as you said, Josiah, because all this, when all these things were overturned, the most brazen altar we have in America has been that of abortion. And when this was overturned, it was the breaking, it was the cracking of the altar. When you look at the cover of the Josiah Manifesto, you'll see this broken altar. And the broken altar is a sign in the Bible of the chance for revival. It means so much, and there's no one that it points to more than in the entire Bible more than Josiah. Josiah is all about the breaking of the altars. When they would have revival, they would break the altars of the pagan gods. Josiah actually went down to the Valley of Hinnom, and he basically nullified all those altars. So the thing is that we are in the part of the revelation is we are in the Josiah moment for America. On one hand, it means it's late. You see, on the other hand, it means there is hope, but it's between judgment or revival. And the thing is, that's where Josiah stood. When you look at the last 100 pages of the Josiah Manifesto is the actual manifesto, which we won't even be able to get into. But what do we do? What did Josiah do? What are the keys? Can we still change the course of history? Can we change the course of America? And what do we do with persecution? What do we do with it? How do we stand against the darkness? So the answer is all pointing to this one really incredible key, who is Josiah. And the thing is that it says, what this is all saying is, one, Josiah came near the end of ancient Israel. So it's saying the hour is late for America. We stand on one hand at the verge of judgment. The same things that were in Josiah's times are now. You know what? He dealt with, of course, the offering of children, but he also dealt with a culture in sexual immorality, with gender confusion and gender alteration, all these things. He dealt with all of it. And so the thing is, we're in that day now. So it's a very critical moment we're in. At the same time, what it's telling us is that one man, it only takes one person, as you alluded to, one man who can actually alter the course of history, or in our case, one generation. Or those listening, you can be that Josiah. But I believe God wants us to now rise up as Josiah did. And so Josiah really holds the key. That's why it's called Manifesto, this Josiah Manifesto, because it's saying, how do you stand now? And how do you prevail? How can you actually affect the future of this nation? How do what do you do when persecution comes? How do you stand? And so it's very radical, and it's very powerful, I believe, the answer from God. So that is where the Josiah Manifesto is going, what it's going to expose.
The book is coming out today.
Yes.
September 6th. And only a few people have read it. There were some advanced copies that we sent to the media and different key leaders. There are many, many people that are Jonathan Cahn fans that will read anything you write. I'm one of them. Even though I'm your publisher, I enjoy reading you. You're an excellent writer. I think most people would know that. But your writing is deeper than that. You don't write this book just to show off your writing talent or because you have nothing else to do. You're trying to accomplish something. And each book seems to build on the one before, as you just said. Why do you hope that people get out of this book, and maybe as the different interviewers and so forth that you've done in the media so far, even though the book is not literally out until now, what kind of response are you getting to the Josiah Manifesto?
Well, I think, Steve, on one hand, first of all, I knew this is the only time in my writing where I knew the day that I finished the book before, which is The Return of the Gods. And if you look at the epilogue, you'll even see the hint of this. I knew that I had to write this. And I knew because the books I write reveal a lot of things, and some people say, okay, what do we do? What do we do? So this, more than any other, the Josiah Manifesto has the answer, not only the mysteries, but it has the answer and hope. What do you, and that we are called to rise, and we are called to get a lot more radical. There is hope. This could be our greatest hour. When the dark gets darker, that could be the greatest hour. The apostles did not live in a Christian culture, yet they were the greatest light. So Elijah, so Moses, that brings out the greatest. So I am hoping for a great a rise for not that people rise to the greatness of the hour, the greatness of the call, and what God has called for this generation. So number one. Secondly, you said at the beginning, only a few people have gotten right now. It comes out today, but up till today, as you said, it was only a few people who could have gotten the copy. I just got emails from them, like on the launch team, and they just said, well, we're just blown away, and this is challenging us. One of the people we know, I won't mention his name, was actually at Charisma, who read it, said, me and my wife, we knew, what do we do now? We got to rise, so that's what I'm hoping. God has his way.
Well, I hope that people will get the book. It's available wherever books are sold. A quick way is to go on Amazon.com and get it. Many, many books have already been pre-ordered. Jonathan Cahn is on a media tour to get out the word, and it's more than just selling a book. It's just that the book is the vehicle for this message, because you also minister. I know you're, even as we're recording this, you're ministering at a conference that was set up a long time ago. And I'm just so appreciative of what you've done, and you've meant so much to so many people, starting with the Harbinger, which showed the mystery about the towers coming down, then the Book of Mysteries, then the Shemitah, which predicted the 7-year cycle, when everything was forgiven, and looking at the different stock market crashes and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just, it's still great reading. All the books you've done are as vibrant and alive and applicable as the day you wrote it. On Return of the Gods, you talk about how these pagan gods are coming back into the culture as the culture gets farther and farther away from God. But you also said something about the Roman Empire not being a Christian culture. It wasn't. They fed Christians to lions and burned their corpses as torches. I mean, as bad as things are, it doesn't begin to compare, yet the church prevailed, replaced the Roman Empire, and got rid of those gods. I mean, there is no worship of Zeus anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And it was fascinating when you finished The Return of the Gods, the day, and listen, I'm very aware of the day it comes to the publisher. It was when they announced about Roe v. Wade. I mean, it was almost like some kind of prophetic sign. As we're wrapping up this podcast, why don't I give you the last word?
Yeah, you just open up something great. But I'll just quickly say this in a nutshell. One is that someone gave me a vision who I work with and received one and a word, and it was not someone to ever tell me anything like that. And he said he saw me bringing forth a word, and there were all these altars of the gods. He didn't know anything about the book. I didn't write it yet, And he said when all of a sudden they cracked open when you gave the word, they cracked open, and then I saw the beginning of revival. Well, it turned out, as you said, the day that I finished the word to the altars, to the gods, that was the day that the altar broke open. So I believe, and that was the day, Steve, that literally, I knew that the next book was this that now comes out today. So I have no question it's the Lord, and the Lord is calling us to higher ground. This can be really, I believe, our greatest moment. People are praying, I wish I could live in Bible times. Congratulations, you're in Bible times. And when people watch a movie, what's the most exciting part of the movie? The last 15 minutes. So listen, we're in it. So the dark is darker, the challenges are greater, but the power is greater, the glory is greater, what God's going to do in you is greater. It says the eyes of the Lord search the entire earth, looking for the one whose heart is his. He'll show himself mighty. You be that one. So I pray that the Josiah Manifesto is gonna fire that up and is gonna accomplish God's purposes. And I pray that people get it, not just for themselves, but for people in their lives who need to know.
Is it possible that behind the events transforming our nation and your life is a mystery that goes back to ancient times? Does this mystery reveal what the future holds? Even a blueprint to survive, to stand, and to prevail in view of what is coming in the days ahead. In his newest blockbuster, The Josiah Manifesto, the ancient mystery and guide for the end times, New York Times bestselling author Jonathan Cahn reveals the stunning mystery and what it has to do with your life. The Josiah Manifesto will take you on a prophetic journey from a Caribbean island to Washington, D.C., to a desert mountain, to the gates of America, to uncover an ancient puzzle that lies behind the events that have altered our lives. What does the future hold? And what do you need to know? It will all be revealed in the Josiah Manifesto, the ancient mystery and guide for the end times, the book you can't afford not to read. Available wherever books are sold.